Doc T here again for another podcast of the Horse's Advocate. I'm glad you're joining me today. I just wanted to go over something in little bits and pieces over the next couple of podcasts. I spent almost 2 hours talking to a horse owner about nutrition in horses and realized that it took me 2 hours to go over everything. It's a mini seminar that I gave, basically. And it made me realize that there are a lot of concepts here that people are having trouble grasping, not because of intelligence, but the overwhelm of so many pieces in the puzzle. And I want to go over a couple of them and spread it out so you can listen to podcasts and get a pretty good idea of what I'm trying to talk about. So today is going to be the breakdown of nutrition. And I'm just rolling my eyes here a little bit because I haven't planned this. And it's not that I haven't planned it. It's more like it's a revolving carousel, like at the local fair where the horse is going up and down, going around and around. And you need to jump on this moving machine someplace. And it's kind of hard to figure out exactly where to jump on. So I'm going to just section this carousel of thought, this twirling thing, and just take one piece. And the one piece I want to go over is the mitochondria, because the mitochondria is what they call the powerhouse of the cell. It is a piece of equipment that almost every cell in our body holds on to create energy from fuel. So the mitochondria is like the engine inside your car. Now, if you have an electric car, it's the motor. But let's not go there. Let's not confuse things. Most people have gasoline or diesel powered engines. And that engine, when it combusts the fuel, turns the wheels and makes your vehicle go down the road. So let's just hold on to that concept. And you can tell that every vehicle out there that has an engine has a fuel tank. And in that fuel tank is a fuel of some sort. And some fuels work and some fuels don't work. So you don't want to put diesel fuel into a gasoline engine. This is why they have different nozzle sizes in the fuel tank. So the diesel, you grab the diesel pump, you try and stick it in your car's fuel tank, and it won't fit because they only take gasoline. So they make it almost idiot proof. So you don't want to put diesel in a gas car. But if I took crude oil, just pumped it out of the ground, out of a big well, and got that black gooey stuff and just poured it into your fuel tank, that's not going to work either. So the raw materials you put into the horse's mouth is very similar to the crude oil. It has to be refined. It has to be turned into a product that can be used for fuel. So when you throw in the taco salad, when you throw in the margarita, when you throw in, the popcorn with or without butter, all the food that we put into our mouths, or in the horse that we put in the forage, the pasture, the bale of hay, the supplements, the grains, the packages of senior feed or show and grow or something like that. All of them are basically raw materials. And those raw materials go through a refinery called your digestive tract. And that digestive tract is very good at breaking these things down and allowing only the the pieces that we need to operate come through that semi-permeable membrane that we call our gut wall. And the gut wall is constantly being attacked by things that we don't want inside of us, such as foreign bacteria or toxins, molds, and now inflammatory ingredients that people think horses should be eating. So it hits this wall and it allows in water, allows in gas, such as the air that we breathe. It allows in minerals, the calcium, the phosphorus, the iron, the magnesium, the zinc, all these elements that are not carbon, hydrogen, or oxygen. They allow them in a very controlled way. Then they allow in fat, sugar, and protein in the forms of small proteins called peptides or amino acids. And those are the 6 things that they're supposed to let through the gut wall. Anything else is basically bullying their way through, punching holes in the lining of the gut called leaky gut syndrome, etc. But that's what the refinery does. It turns the crude oil into a fuel, and the fuels that our bodies use, the horse's body use, primarily are glucose and fat. And fat we're going to call free fatty acids. Free fatty acids can move throughout the body in a vessel called a lipoprotein. And these lipoproteins you and I both know as HDL or LDL, which everyone confuses with cholesterol. So you measure HDL and your LDL, HDL being quote unquote the good and the LDL being the bad. And we don't want that. Now, I know we're going to be talking about mitochondria, but I'm going to throw this other stuff in because you get to hear it over and over and over again, then you get it. So LDL, low density lipoprotein, is a protein, if you think of it as a vessel. A vessel is a boat that carries something that you don't want to get wet through the water to go from point A to point B. And fats don't mix well with water. Anybody who's been in the kitchen knows that. So we have to put it in a vessel and ship it through our body. And in that vessel, we put free fatty acids, we put triglycerides mostly, and we put cholesterol in these vessels, and they take it over to where it can be used. And the passengers are discharged the triglycerides, and the triglycerides can come into the muscle cell like sunlight coming through your window. It just comes through. So let's take a look at the mitochondria and what it likes to be fed. Now, almost everybody on the planet will agree. And if you don't agree with this, I can't help you. I kind of believe it myself. But billions of years ago, when we were just one-cell organisms, we started to hunt around and tried to survive in a very hostile environment. And one of the things that was happening on our planet was we were making more and more of an element called oxygen. And this oxygen was foreign to us. We didn't like it. It didn't serve us any purpose. We were living fine on methane and other gases. And as oxygen increased, our cells started to say, whoa, we need some help here. And along came another bacteria, a single-cell organism. And the single-cell organism said, I do really well with oxygen. If you give me oxygen, I will give you a spark of energy. And that spark of energy can operate all your systems. Let's start learning to live together. So the mitochondria actually was invited into the single-cell organism. And it's called an organelle, or a part of a cell. So we have one cell, a human cell or a horse cell. And in there, we have these structures called mitochondria. And the mitochondria actually have their own DNA. And that DNA is very specific, and we can find out what that mitochondrial DNA is. If you watch any crime show, they talk about, they did a mitochondrial DNA analysis. And this is what they're talking about. The DNA of the mitochondria is different than your DNA or your horse's DNA. And that's what's fascinating. So, just a side note, all your mitochondria in humans have come from your mother. The mitochondria of the sperm that comes from the male is in its tail. And the tail gets jettisoned when the head of the sperm penetrates the egg and the two meet and blend. It's not just our DNA that's blending, but all the mitochondria are being exchanged as well. So all that comes there. Also, the number of mitochondria in a cell is proportional to the amount of energy that your structure needs. So your retina, which is the nerve endings of your eye, are constantly being exposed. I close my eyes just to give them a rest. But the mitochondria there's a large amount. There's a large amount in your heart because the heart is constantly beating. And in the brain, the prefrontal cortex are loaded with mitochondria because all of these are working so hard. Interesting note, those three are the highest, but not the highest. The highest organ of a human body with mitochondria, the densest population of mitochondria, are the ovaries of women. So go figure. You guys are little machines out there, constantly working, and you need a lot of fuel. And so these mitochondria set up shop, and they said, we're going to create something called a Krebs cycle. No, they didn't do it that way, but they created this process where they can take fuel and they can go through a cycle. You have a cycle as a circle where it has a beginning and the end ends at the beginning. So it goes round and round and round. And the fuels will enter the cycle, and through a series of processes that include proteins called enzymes, they will convert this fuel into a spark or two or three of energy. And one of the things that you may have heard of is ATP. And ATP is not that motor oil additive called STP, for all of you guys who remember STP added to your engine and run smoother. This is ATP, stands for adenosine triphosphate, ATP. And the T, tri, means three. And through a process, one of those phosphoruses of the ATP gets blown off, and now it becomes adenosine diphosphate, which is two. And then it blows off another one and becomes adenosine monophosphate, or AMP. And that's really interesting. So two sparks of energy come off, and the sparks of energy go into a electron transport mechanism. Just calm down, everybody. I'm not going to get too much further ahead, but it takes nicotinamide adenine nucleotide. Did I say that right? Dinucleotide, sorry, NAD. And it blows off a hydrogen and becomes NAD plus. And NAD plus is what really sparks, keeps the wheels moving. All right. If you don't have NADH being converted to NAD plus, you basically die. That's just as simple as that. And there are some precursors out there, and there are some enhancers of this process available to be taken by humans. And I thought I'd throw that out there because I heard a phenomenal podcast of a person who's really developed not just precursors, but what helps in the NAD plus recycling program. And I'm experimenting myself with this, and I'm not too sure what I think about it, but I've decided I was going to look at this because every 20 years or so, your NAD plus in humans is cut in half. And so every 20 years, it's going half again, half again. And so when you hit 60 to 80 years old, you're operating on about 20 or so % of the original NAD that you had as a youngster. And you tend to slow down and you start to age and you fall apart. So I'm experimenting with that. I'll tell you about that another year or so. But going back to the mitochondria, this is what the mitochondria do. They take fuel, and the fuels are either sugar or fat, glucose or free fatty acids, and they throw them into this cycle, and they add oxygen, and it becomes aerobic, and they spit out these two electrons, and the two electrons go into this NAD transport mechanism and blow off something that creates movement, and it's beyond my pay grade, and certainly, not necessary to know about your horses. What you need to know about your horses, the two fuels, glucose and free fatty acids. And this is where a lot of people get stuck. And I know that it seems hard to break away from what I call dogma. Dogma is basically what everyone believes as to be true. And I come in and I stir the pot and say, no, that's not true. So let's look at what people believe. People believe that you need oxygen to get this energy to work, and that is true. But if that were the case, maybe sucking in more oxygen would help you get more energy. And people have learned to train at high altitudes trying to get more oxygen into their system, but it's maxed out because oxygen actually is toxic to all mammals, horses and you included. Yes, it's nice to have all the oxygen that is maximally that you can take in, but if you add oxygen to it, you actually die. So we don't want to add oxygen. So oxygen isn't it. Some people believe that if you work anaerobically, which means that you're working to create energy without oxygen, that's beneficial. And if you train in an anaerobic environment, that you'll become more fit. And it turns out that's not true at all. That actually burns other fuels that we're not supposed to burn, except in extreme emergencies on a rare occasion. When somebody's chasing after you with a machete, or in the old days, the saber-toothed tiger is coming out to eat you, you're going to run as far as you can go, and your heart won't be able to keep up with it because your muscles are going out there. So your heart can't deliver the blood or the oxygen, and you move into anaerobic exercise, and it's only meant for a very short period of time, but there's no benefit. There's a lot of downsides to anaerobic exercise. So we don't want to go there. So we want to stay with oxygen at a set rate, but we do want to use the best burning fuel. So if you had a cheap car, I mean, it is a horrible car, and you're on a shoestring budget of eating noodles, you're going to put in the cheapest gasoline you can because it's going to make the car go down the road and get you to your work or to your loved ones. But you're not really worried about the health and maintenance of that car. You're just going to run it into the ground. And when it starts coughing and sputtering and finally fizzles out on the side of the road, you'll just go out and get another car. And that's what burning bad fuel is all about. So the mitochondria will work on bad fuel. It just isn't going to work as efficiently. It's going to create a lot of black smoke out of the exhaust pipe, which we could call free radicals. And it's going to clog. The free radicals are going to build up. And then you go out and you buy all these supplements that are supposed to take care of free radicals and cleanse your body. And you're basically not understanding how the system works. You're just basically taking dish rags and trying to clean up the mess. And all you're doing is smearing it around. Even though you're cleaning up a little bit, it's just not perfect. It's not running top notch. But let's say you have $250,000 and you go out and you buy some sort of fancy sports car. Are you going to put in the lowest grade fuel that you can? Or are you going to seek out the best quality fuel with all the additives to make sure that your valves don't stick? And that's what a high quality fuel is all about. And you're willing to spend a little bit more money to get that. Well, it turns out that the poor quality fuel is sugar or glucose. Surprise. I bet a bunch of you already knew that. But now you're understanding why. And then the high quality fuel are the free fatty acids that come into the cell on the form of triglycerides. So I'm going to make a little bit of a parable, a story for you to understand how this works. So when sugar is available and sugar comes into the horse's mouth in the form of starch, and the starch is in the form of summer pasture, in the form of hay that's basically preserved summer pasture, and in the form of grains and sugar cubes and carrots and anything else you throw in the horse's mouth that's got starch in it. That starch is absorbed in the intestines and comes across the gut membrane easily because that's one of the molecules that the gut is allowed to bring in at any time. And insulin is there to escort glucose because glucose can get into the blood system and it's called your blood glucose levels. We've all heard about blood glucose. And that just means that the sugars freely form in the blood. And that's important because that's the way blood gets into, or glucose gets to your brain, and your brain needs glucose to operate. So that's one way of doing it. Insulin cannot transport glucose across the single layer between your brain and your body called the blood-brain barrier. It just can't get across it. So instead, it just freely floats across the blood-brain barrier. Now remember, sugar and water mix beautifully. Just take a cup of water and pour sugar in it, stir it, and you see it's all dissolved. Whereas if you put fat in water and stir it, it all floats up to the top. It never mixes. And therefore, fat has to be transported. And the fat that comes into the horse's body, and that's from the breakdown of cellulose into short-chain fatty acids, are gobbled up by these little vacuoles, or what's the word? Oh, good grief. I'll think of it probably after I do the podcast. Not my seals. Anyway, those out there listening to this, you're screaming at me. I know you know what it is, but they're ingested into these small vacuoles, and they float through the system and either go into the fat cells or they go off to the muscle cells. And chylomicrons, thank you. My brain finally kicked in. Chylomicrons. And they take these fat things. Also, the lipoproteins take them, the LPL, low density lipoproteins will take the triglycerides and haul them through the blood. So free fatty acids can go through in the chylomicrons, or the triglycerides will be loaded into the shipping container called lipoproteins, and the low density lipoproteins, and they'll be taken to the muscle. Let's get back to mitochondria, because this podcast is about mitochondria and what it does. So here's my little story to help you remember or understand what happens. You have a house, and that house has a couple of things. It has a front door. It has a back door. It has a bunch of closets. It has windows, and it has a fireplace. All right. The fireplace is the mitochondria. That's where things are burned, and that's where you get your energy from. So you burn things like wood. And there's a bunch of you who are listening to this who have never seen a fireplace or don't understand anything about it. So let's just do a little sidebar here for you guys. The fireplace is how we heated our homes up until the past 100 years. You could use coal and oil now. There's all different ways you can heat your house. But basically, you had to burn something. And what we burned was wood. And we found that if we took wood from, trees, that we cut down, we seasoned it. We let it sit outside for a while. We let it dry out. We let it become cured. So when we put it in the fireplace, it caught on fire very quickly. And that quick fire gave us a lot of heat. It smelled good, and there's no smoke. There's no tar going up there. You didn't throw wet pine logs in there because that was bad. You put in seasoned firewood. So I want you in your mind to think of the triglycerides as the seasoned wood for your fireplace. And it comes through your window without having to go through any doors. It just comes through the window and settles in next to the fireplace and says, I'm ready to be burned. And it throws off a free fatty acid, throws in the fireplace, and it's burned. Throws off another free fatty acid, and it's burned. Throws out another one, it's burned, and the glycerol does something else, goes away. I have no idea what happens to it. But the triglycerides are 3 fatty acids attached to glycerol. So that's triglycerides. Glucose, on the other hand, comes to the door, and it can't walk through the wall. It can't come through the windows. It's like you or me coming to a house. We have to go to the front door and knock. So I want you to think of insulin as your local delivery guy. I call him the FedEx guy because everybody knows in the United States what FedEx is, or in the world basically knows FedEx. But FedEx is the delivery guy, and he's got a package called glucose. So glucose comes in via a package delivered by FedEx. FedEx goes to the door, knocks on the door, And in your house, you have servants. Isn't this great? You didn't know this, but you had servants. And you send your servant, we're going to call this servant GLUT4, G-L-U-T, and the number 4, GLUT4. And it represents a transport process that actually sends a tube up from this center of your cell to the wall of your house and opens the front door. And when the door is opened, the FedEx guy throws a package of glucose in and it tumbles down into the cell and the door is shut. That's called glucose transport because glucose can't get through the walls because the walls are made of fat. That's why triglycerides come right through the wall because it's fat, but glucose can't. So it needs insulin. Insulin has to trigger that door, has to knock on the door, set GLUT4 up there, and allow the glucose to fall in and go inside the cell. Now, what's really interesting is the purpose of glucose is to fuel you in an emergency because it's cheap and dirty fuel. It's accessible, and there it is. So what we do is we take the glucose molecule in our house and we store it neatly inside a closet. And we get our next package of glucose and store it neatly inside the closet, and we stack them so we can put maximal amount of glucose molecules in our closets. And we're going to call that glycogen storage. That's what all animals on the planet do. They take glycogen, they take glucose, and they store it in there as glycogen. Now, let's pretend in your house, all the closets get filled. And now you're all set. You've got your emergency set. Glucose is there ready at beck and call. You just throw it in your fireplace and burn it because the seasoned logs take a while to catch and to fire up and to give you that heat that you want. Well, the glucose you throw in there and burn it's really quick. So as long as things are going fine, the glucose is going to keep stored in the glycogen, and you're going to keep reaching over for a log and add it to your fireplace, and everything's fine. The problem is the door keeps getting knocked on, and you keep sending your servant to open the door, and the servant says, throw it in, we'll find a place for it, and brings it back, and it has no place to store it because all your closets are full. So now what does it do? It throws it in a garbage pail and it accumulates some of that glucose in the garbage pail, and finally say, empty the garbage pail, and it gets thrown into the cycle of the mitochondria of the fireplace. And next thing you know, you're burning glucose. So glucose will get you burned. And that's great. I don't want to interrupt this, but I'm noticing that I have a heck of a shadow in here. And sorry about that. For those of you who are watching on video, I'm just going to turn the light down a little bit. That's a little bit better. Okay. So glucose is being burned, and it's being burned with black smoke coming off and gunk. And it's not giving the heat that you need, but it's getting things done. And because it's not giving the heat it needs, the cells are saying, hey, I need more fuel. And you're being very good because glucose keeps coming to your door and you keep throwing it in. And the reason glucose keeps coming to your door is because somebody is putting sugar in the mouth constantly. And the sugar that goes into the mouth needs a home. Now, if you recall, there's only 3 places glucose can go. 1 is in glycogen storage in your muscles, 2, glycogen storage in your liver, and 3, it can be converted into free fatty acids and stored inside your fat cell as a triglyceride. Those are the 3 fates of glucose, or what we call glucose disposal. So every molecule of glucose you're going to put in your horse's mouth or in your mouth is either going to go to muscle for glycogen, liver for glycogen, or fat cell as a free fatty acid. That's it. Or it can go up to your brain. I guess it can flow up to your brain and be burned up there, and that's fine. It keeps us alive, and that's super. But here's the deal. You didn't know this, but your fire logs, those nicely seasoned logs, have feelings. And their feelings are saying, hey, what about us? We transport ourselves all the way over here. We went from free fatty acids to triglycerides. We made our way over here. We got in here. We stacked it here next to your fireplace, and you're ignoring us. We don't like that. And in fact, there's a personality of us called the diglyceride, where it blows off one of the free fatty acids of the triglyceride, it becomes a diglyceride. And the diglyceride is jealous. I mean, it's just stinking jealous, and it sees a problem, and it's a problem solver. The problem it sees is glucose keeps coming into the cell, and it keeps being burned in the cycle, and you're starting to accumulate inside the horse's cell. And it's been shown that this accumulation of triglycerides and diglycerides are accumulating inside humans as young as 20 years old who are sedentary and not working. And we're getting what's called intracellular fat, not to be confused with marbling on a steak. This is inside the cell, and it's your first sign that there's a problem and your future is doomed. And what happens is the diglyceride goes over to the door and changes the lock. It basically does not let GLUT4, the servant, get to the door and open it. It blocks it. And now outside the door, you've got insulin with a package of glucose, the FedEx guy with glucose, and they're not letting it in. So the sugar can't make it into the cell anymore. And everybody in the horse world knows that this is what we call insulin resistance. The cell has resisted insulin's job of knocking on the door and delivering a package of glucose. So now that glucose molecule no longer has a muscle cell to deposit. So it's left with only two more places to go: the liver for glycogen, that plus fueling the brain, and excess turned into body fat as free fatty acids. And this is why the more sugar you eat, starting when you're 20 years old, or a horse starting when it's 3 or 4 years old, the more grain you feed it, the more the sugar will actually go into the fat cell and become a fat cell, an engorged fat cell. This is what the cause of increased body fat or obesity is, and the start of insulin resistance. So now that they have insulin resistance, now what happens? Well, the cell can now start using fat for fuel, but it's not that simple, because insulin is going to turn off the fat cell's exit door so that the fat cell can no longer put free fatty acids into the system for use, because you don't store fat inside the muscle cell. You only store fat in the fat cell. So here's your muscle cell, and you're going to walk to the barn and do your barn chores. And you get down there, and you're not there in the barn much longer than, a few minutes, where you start thinking about lunch. You start saying, hey, I'm getting hungry here. And the reason you're getting hungry is because your mitochondria inside your cells are screaming, saying, we need more fuel. We need more fuel to fuel ourselves. So bring me some food. So the first thing you do is you run over and you get off the coffee truck some bagels and donuts, which is all sugar. And you put sugar in your coffee, or you grab a soda pop that's loaded with sugar. I digress. I'm not talking about us. Let's talk about horses. So the horse, you give a lunch meal. Horses aren't supposed to have meals like lunches, but I go to so many barns where they say, oh, we're going to feed lunch now. And so they throw in some sort of grain or supplement, or they give them some carrots. And the sugars come into the system, and the sugar is being absorbed and attached to insulin, because insulin's there because sugar's there. And insulin runs over to the muscle cell and says, here's some sugar. I've got some sugar for you. But the door's locked because of insulin resistance. So the sugar can't be used as a fuel. Furthermore, any sugar that's been in the glycogen storage or the closets of your house have already been consumed. So the closets are becoming more empty. And then in addition, it's screaming for some more fat, But insulin's gone off to the liver, dropped off the glucose to make it either used in the brain or converted into free fatty acids. And then insulin goes over and latches on to the fat cell and doesn't let the fat leave. So now you're getting starved at the cellular level, both of glucose due to insulin resistance and fat because the fat can't get there. So the horse becomes hungrier and hungrier and hungrier, just like the obese person is sitting there at the diner and you can't even see the stool they're sitting on. They're so fat, yet they're so hungry. They're starving at the cellular level. They need to eat something. And the easiest thing they can eat is a stack of pancakes, which just creates the same cycle of adding more body fat without allowing that fat or glucose to be used for fuel. So the process keeps going. The cycle inside the mitochondria is like screaming for more. The horse is constantly hungry. It can't be satiated. It's constantly looking. It's becoming food aggressive. It's can't see straight. And by the way, the more food you feed him that's inflammatory, the more the blood-brain barrier becomes leaky as well. And some of those inflammatory materials are now inflaming the brain. So he's not a willing partner. He's starting to misbehavior. He's not 100% with you. He's not a willing partner. And the same's going on with you, and you can't connect. And it just cascades down this horrible cascade of events that makes you just frustrated with owning a horse. But in reality, it boils down to the mitochondria. All it wants is fuel. And the more sugar you feed these horses, the less fuel it's actually getting. Its fuel filter is clogged. The fuel in your gas tank is not reaching the engine. The engine is starting to sputter, not only because it can't get the fuel it needs, but the fuel that's been put in there is creating free radicals. And the free radicals are not being taken care of. There's nobody cleaning the house. Now, in humans, they found a couple of things. In humans, if they stop eating, what they call intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating, where you eat only one meal a day and you spend, 16, 18, 20, 22 hours of not eating anything, what happens is magic. Inside the cell, they start to clear up all these pollutants or free radicals through a process called autophagy. And the cell is too bad. If it's beyond repair, they actually consume the cell. The whole cell is just eaten up and goes away. And that's called apoptosis. And that actually is triggered by a couple of things: cellular events and foods that are available or not available. And that's a whole nother podcast. But by providing a period of not eating in all mammals, the cells are now allowed to clean up. And once they clean up, then they start to have access to the fat and they start to use the fuel. And because insulin's not there, insulin will go down when you don't eat for a while. And when it goes down, the fat cells start to release some of the triglycerides, and slowly you start getting a fuel that's going to the cell that's a cleaner burning fuel, much like that seasoned log. And now the horse, when he's not getting as much glucose as it's less than what his daily needs are, now the horse is going to start going into his body fat. He's going to lose weight, definitely. And the weight he's going to lose is going to be the body fat. And when he loses the body fat, the horse is going to become satiated because that fuel is like that seasoned log. It burns hotter. It gives more energy. There's no pollutants that come out with it. So it's a better fuel. So now the horse is happier. It recovers from a long, hard work, and it does okay. And one other secret that I didn't talk about was I told you that your house had a front door and a back door. What's interesting is the servant never goes to the back door. That's off limits. And what happens is the glucose molecule can come around with no insulin. Yes, there's glucose out there without insulin, and it's just free floating around going to your brain. but it can also go to the muscle cell and enter through the back door without an insulin escort and without the GLUT4 transport. And the door always stays open, but it's only opened when the horse has worked hard. In humans, you have to be at 65% or more of your VO2 max, which is a physiological term, which is boiled down to basically the number 180 minus your age. So if you're 30 years old, you get your heart rate up to 150, and you'll open up the back door and allow the glucose to come in, and that can be stored in the glycogen, or it can actually be burned. But either way, you're going to be getting rid of glucose in the blood, which is going to decrease the amount of insulin that's out there and help promote the absorption of body fat. Because you're going to exercise at that for about 45 minutes, and then you're just going to rest for 12, 14 hours. And you're going to allow the body to convert over to using body fat. And your total body fat stores are going to be reduced. Your muscles are going to be fed with fat. The glucose that came in is going to restore your glycogen levels, so you'll be better off for the events that you need glycogen for. And overall, you're going to become healthier. This is why diet and exercise has been the mantra, diet and exercise. The problem with diet is nobody knew what diet was. And the real thing is get rid of sugar in your horse's diet and your diet, because sugar in excess of your daily needs is going to be converted into body fat. It's just that simple. Moreover, glucose in excess needs are going to shut down your mitochondria, because the mitochondria needs either fat or glucose to operate. And it's going to be shut down glucose because of insulin resistance. And it's going to be shut down from fat, because the fat is going to be kept in the fat stores, because the body's desperately trying to maintain its fat stores, because winter's coming. And when winter comes, there's no more sugar coming in your mouth. The horse will have nothing but dormant winter pasture. And we now know that that dormant winter pasture that's high in cellulose is going to be converted by the horse into short chain fatty acids, which is the fat they need to create the free fatty acids to be burned for fuel. So the mitochondria is the epicenter, if you will. It's the engine under the hood. And you know that if you don't feed that engine with a good fuel, and you can feed it crappy fuel, like the lowest grade of fuel money can buy, it's not going to run well. It's going to fizzle out. And the longevity of your car is going to be shortened, as well as your horse's body. And remember, every time the horse can't get sugar, because the sugar is being sequestered, being taken up by the insulin and converted into body fat, your brain is going to be screaming for more sugar. Your cells are going to be screaming for more fuel. And the only place the horse can get more glucose, I know, I'm going to pause here for a second. I'm going to start again. When your horse is being fed more sugar than it can use, that sugar is converted into fat and is not available for use in the muscle due to insulin resistance. And so the muscles are screaming for more glucose, more fuel of any sort. They're dying here. They'll take glucose. They'll take anything. And what happens is the liver responds and it says, I've got another source of glucose that we can get to you. I'm going to take your proteins, the amino acids that are making up all your proteins. I'm going to take those amino acids. I'm going to convert them into glucose by blowing off the nitrogen. We'll just excrete that nitrogen out your urine, and we're going to convert that into glucose. And that glucose, we're going to either drive in through your back door, or at least going to get it into your brain to keep you alive. And so you start to slowly eat away. The top line goes away, the hooves fall apart, the hair coat looks crappy, the neurotransmitters of Cushing's disease get chewed up and no longer there. Insulin resistance is running. You've got all these other diseases. You got your ligaments and tendons that are no longer strong, and you're still exercising the horse very hard against a weakening structure that finally breaks down, usually in the soft tissues, such as the suspensories or a tendon. They break down because they don't have the materials needed to repair and to build and maintain. So now you have a lame horse You have a top line goes away. You have a horse that's retired by 12 years of age, which, the horse is going to still sit there and eat on your farm for another 12 years. So you've got a huge financial investment, a horse that can't be ridden, it's lame, it's not behaving well because you keep feeding it more sugar. So it's not happy. It's creating stable vices. And you and the horse are getting, angry and angry at each other. I know that's not you. You love your horse. But I've seen this. I've seen this all over horses that are just miserable. And if you just take them off the grain and reduce the amount of hay they're being fed and honor the system of ebbing and flowing of glucose and allow the body to shift over in what we call mitochondrial flexibility. That's the flexibility that the mitochondria have to use two different fuels. It's like having a car that can take low test gasoline and high test gasoline. You take your Ferrari, you're going to put the high test gasoline in there, but on occasion, in a pinch, you're going to throw in the glucose, the low test, the crappy fuel. And it'll go down the road, but it's not going to be happy, but it'll get you down the road. If you keep doing it, the car's going to die. But if you keep putting in the better fuel, the car's going to keep going and going and going. And that's what we want for your horse. We want longevity. And the best way you can get longevity out of a horse, a great health span of longevity, where the soft tissues don't break down, they don't have these neurodegenerative diseases, and their top line remains strong so they don't have kissing spine come along. The hooves remain strong and connected so you don't have your laminitis, is to put the fuels in that the horse actually needs to burn. And that is fats. And we know that fats come from cellulose in a hindgut fermenting horse. Horses, tapirs, and rhinoceroses, never forget, horses, tapirs, and rhinoceroses are odd-toed ungulates, which means they have a single, or pardon me, one or three hooved toes. They don't have two or four, which would be an even-toed ungulate, and they are ruminants. So horses are unique. Just because they got the head on the grass, just like cattle do, doesn't mean that they're the same. They're not. Two different ways of digesting the food, and the hindgut fermenter takes cellulose and converts it into short-chain fatty acids, and it is a high-fat diet, and that's what your horse is supposed to live on and thrive on. But for some reason, we add sugar, and that reason being is when we started working horses very hard in the late 1800s, early 1900s, where we started to become industrialized and we started moving into cities, and more people had less and less access to farms. So they wanted their bread, they wanted their pastas, they wanted all the comforts of what grains give them. And these horses had to work harder and harder and harder for the millers to mill that grain and send it out as flour to people. And these horses were plowing day and night, and they had to be fed excess. Remember, that back door, they were feeding glucose, and that glucose could get in the back door and they consume it. But most of our horses are sedentary. Remember the 20-year-old sedentary Yale graduates or Yale students that are thrown into these nutritional studies and found that fat was starting to accumulate inside their muscle cells that wasn't being used. And that was the first sign that insulin resistance was about to occur in these people when they turned 30 or 40, if they remain sedentary. So get off your duff, give your horse some exercise. And if he's not being exercised for any reason, whether they're broodmare or they're lame, they're retired, there's no reason on earth to be feeding them excess sugar. It is killing them. It is shortening their lifespan. So, and I know there's going to be dozens of you who say, I've got a 30-some-odd-year-old horse I've been feeding senior feed to forever. I get it. But as those who are feeding senior feed to 15-year-olds, they're not going to be happy. They're not going to be happy. It's causing so many changes to their gut system. So that's me jumping on the carousel of nutrition for you, trying to understand one small segment. It's the mitochondria. You need to have flexibility of mitochondria to use fat and sugar for fuels. The best way you can do that is to add sugar only when it's necessary. When it's dead cold out and they need some more energy, fine, give them some oats. That's great. If you're working them and they're absolutely working their tail off and they can't maintain their weight, add some oats. If it adds weight, great. If it doesn't add weight, you're adding inflammation. You have to understand that the horse prefers fat for fuel, and that comes from cellulose and body fat. And if they can't survive on that, and you see the body fat is now being diminished below what they need, then you can add sugar, because all sugar is going to be turned into body fat and used as a fuel, preferred fuel of fat. But excess sugar, if it can't get into the muscle cell, they're going to burn that, and that glucose that's being burned in there is a poor fuel, and you're going to get your free radicals. And in addition, as you get insulin resistance, the whole glucose of the horse is going to decrease, and the horse is going to increase gluconeogenesis and convert their muscles into glucose. See what I mean? It's a circle. But just focus on the mitochondrial flexibility. How? I know all of you are saying, okay, doc, shut up and just tell me what I'm supposed to do. Well, number one, stop feeding glucose in excess. Glucose comes from all grains and sweet treats that you feed the horses, apples and carrots. Stop feeding that. If they're still obese, soak the hay. Soaking the hay will get the sugar out. If you have adequate grass pasture, just use the pasture. You don't need hay. Hay is a supplement. Hay is necessary for the winters when they're getting so cold. They need extra calories to stay warm, but they don't need hay in the middle of summer. If your horse has pasture, like you see over my shoulder here, I know if you're on a podcast, you're not seeing anything, but their horses turn out in a huge field of grass. They're going to have plenty of cellulose and starch in the summer. So you want to reduce it by reducing the amount of hay you feed in the summer. And when necessary, add soaked hay, because the soaking of the hay will take the water out. The water will take the sugar out, the starch out. And that's what you do. And the idea of being a good horseman is to use your eyes and look at the horse and say, okay, is this horse being fed right? Is he obese? If he is, he's getting too much sugar. It's that simple. If he's not obese and he's maintaining his muscles and he looks like an athlete, you're spot on. You're doing great. If he's not obese, but he's not maintaining muscle and he's starting to look scrawny and he doesn't seem to have the energy he needs to get going, find a fat source, whether it's shredded coconut or more hay. Add a little bit of oats if you have to. If it's dead of winter, you need to get more energy in the horse. It's temporary. This is a not lifelong thing. It's a temporary thing. If you're racing your horse and he's 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old, they can absorb a lot more sugar and use it. And you're running them so their heart rate is getting up and they're opening up the back door so they can use that glucose and it's not causing an insulin spike. So these horses look fit, but they're also breaking down by 4 or 5 years of age, mainly because they don't get enough protein. So that's a whole nother subject. But I hope that does it. Mitochondrial flexibility, the mitochondria, your fireplace in your house. Make sure it's getting good fuel, those seasoned logs of fat, not the garbage called glucose. And you'll find that your horse is going to really respond. Sometimes it takes a month or two for them to convert over and become flexible again, especially if they've been chronically fed grain. It's not overnight. You have to understand. But once you understand the mechanism behind it, now you're going to say, do I really want to feed my horse carrots? Do I really want to feed it these candies and treats in addition to my fancy grains and all my supplements with grain byproducts that are causing more inflammation? Because all the inflammation is going to be using up all the fuel and it's not going to be there for your muscles. If you stop the inflammation in the gut wall, you're going to have more energy available for use inside the muscle, and the horse will be able to recover faster and have more endurance in its abilities to do its job. All right, that's it. Enough of this podcast. I'll come up with another one next week. Dig in this a little bit more and see if we can understand some of these things. I appreciate you spending your time here. Please remember, go to thehorseadvocate.com, become a member. It's there that you can ask me questions and dig into these podcasts a little bit deeper. I don't basically answer any emails anymore. I'm just so overwhelmed with time commitments. I'm still practicing full-time my dentistry practice. And if you get a moment, go to your favorite podcast stream, especially if it's Apple, because they're the top dog. Sorry, Google, but they're the top dog. And take a moment and put a review in there. I don't care if it's 1 star or 5 stars. It means that you're listening. I would appreciate and I would love 5-star ratings. because that helps other people understand that I'm trying to get some good information out here. So that's it. I'm going to sign off and hope you have a great day. Thanks. Bye.
Hey everyone, Doc T here. Thank you for listening to my content. Would you do me a huge favor? Would you please subscribe, comment, like, thumbs up, and give a star review? However it's presented to you, I want you to do that. There are two reasons. The first, of course, is to improve this product. This way I know what you like, what you don't like, what I can improve upon, what topics you want me to cover. But more importantly, it's also going to help others find me. And by doing that, you are now engaged in this mission of helping horses thrive in a human world. By you helping, we can reach others. And that I would be so grateful for. And remember, go to thehorsesadvocate.com for updates on this information. Thehorsesadvocate.com. And again, thank you so much for being here. Doc T out.